We have team coverage for you with Steve Chaggaris, who is there at our CBS News workspace in Manchester, New Hampshire, Nancy Cordes outside Bernie Sanders' New Hampshire campaign headquarters, and Major Garrett, who's also in Manchester. Major, let's start with you, your impressions after last night.
Well, look, Donald Trump has now done something that every Republican who wants to achieve the nomination of the Republican Party and eventually the presidency has to do: win the New Hampshire primary. After doing well in the Iowa caucuses, he has now assembled two, generally speaking, impressive runs as a political novice. He didn't win the Iowa caucuses, but he got the second most vote totals and the largest turnout in the history of the Iowa caucuses. And then he came here to New Hampshire and he absolutely obliterated his Republican competition, assembling a coalition that would be the envy of any Republican president who came before him who won in New Hampshire, because it was, as you said, twice the size of any of the others running against him. And now Donald Trump goes to South Carolina, which has a history of solidifying the Republican nominee for the presidency with a big lead, substantial momentum, and that race is going to be joined as soon as Trump Force One touches down in South Carolina, because Ted Cruz has been organized for a good long while in South Carolina. Jeb Bush loyalists are waiting there to greet Donald Trump. And John Kasich now also arrives in that state, someone who has to assemble a team there rapidly, raise a lot of money, start to build a national campaign while running for president at the same time. That's complicated business, but this race has been reset beneath Trump, but Trump is the undisputed leader.
So we can't talk about the Republicans without talking about John Kasich, somewhat of a surprise second place position. But now the Republican lane is as clear as mud, I would think. The expectation is coming out of New Hampshire, we'd at least know, who was going to be the outsider, who was going to be the establishment candidate. John Kasich, not exactly the best establishment candidate.
Plus, and also, Major, I feel like John Kasich, it's sort of, yes, you came in second, but is it meh? Because he's got to go on to these SEC states, and will what he's talking about play well there?
Right, and let's be careful here, because all of us use the metaphor of the establishment lane, the anti-establishment lane, so on and so forth, because conceptually it works to sort of separate the kind of campaigns and the kind of voters these campaigns are appealing to. But in the end, it's all one lane, and there's only one car that comes out ahead, and that's the one that becomes the eventual nominee. So yes, it's conceptually helpful to think of this as different lanes, but remember, it's all one lane, and Donald Trump is the lead car right now. Now, to your point about John Kasich, he invested for 8 months in the state of New Hampshire. John Weaver is his campaign manager. John Weaver led John McCain to two very impressive victories in New Hampshire before. The Kasich campaign brought a game plan to New Hampshire, and it worked in large measure. Second to Donald Trump is not nothing, but it's not first. But what John Kasich doesn't have is a game plan for South Carolina. He doesn't have a game plan for Mississippi, Alabama, and many of those southern primaries that are going to vote on March 1st. What he has to wait for is a game plan when this campaign gets up to the industrial Midwest: Ohio, Michigan, Illinois. John Kasich can win there. The question for the Kasich campaign: can it survive that long? Can it raise the money and perform competitively in these sort of in-between primaries before it gets on geographic and political terrain that works to its advantage? That is the central question for Kasich, because his advisors don't believe he can win South Carolina. They're just going to try to be competitive there. They feel the same way about many of the March 1st primaries, with the exception of some up here in the Northeast, like Massachusetts. But other than that, the Kasich campaign has to raise money, put together a staff, and survive until this race moves to the Midwest.
Major, Marco Rubio lost his luster finishing 5th in the primary. Now, he admitted that his repetition in the debate on Saturday didn't do him any favors. The question I think a lot of people are going to have going into the next couple of states is, are these sort of what people are calling robotic responses indicative of the criticism that, for example, Governor Christie had of Senator Rubio, which he just doesn't have the experience, that he's overcoached?
Marco Rubio has to answer a question. What are you made of? What is your campaign actually about? Is your campaign about rhetoric, or is it about experience, and is it about the ability to convince voters that you not only have some well thought out rhetorical flourishes that you can display prominently at a debate stage, but you've actually thought through the entire reason you're running for the presidency and would know what to do if you were to be given the job in the first place? There were a lot of people who were believing that not just that Marco Rubio had the rhetoric, but he actually had at least enough of the experience, enough of the insight to handle the job. Now, one debate is not going to dismantle all of that, but one debate did raise questions that Marco Rubio had worked for months to try to silence. They're now real. And one of the great things about voting is this. Politicians can ignore things and pretend they don't exist, but once the voters render a verdict, they have to admit that they're true. From the moment that Saturday evening debate ended, the Rubio campaign said, oh, you guys in the media are making way too much out of this. Nothing much happened. It wasn't a big deal. And that was the line until the voters voted. And then they had to face reality, square in the face. And it was cold, it was brutal, it was ugly. It did matter. Marco Rubio's momentum not just stalled, it collapsed in this state. And the reason it collapsed is because Marco Rubio showed people something that his opponents said existed all along, but he had tried to cover up. Now it's there out in the open, and so Rubio has to go to South Carolina, restart his campaign, and begin the process of convincing voters that which they saw on the debate stage Saturday was a fluke, and he really is the candidate they thought he was all along.
Yeah, indeed. I want to move over to the Democrats, and Nancy Cordes is standing by. Bernie Sanders crushed Hillary Clinton in a way that we have not seen in years. And I think the most interesting thing that came out of this defeat is that he beat her with a number of voters that are usually a lock for her. In fact, I think in almost every category, he was able to beat her. She's got a long road ahead.
That's right. And, you know, as you're pointing out, she lost among women big by 11 points, but she lost virtually among every group of voters at every education level. She lost among young voters. She lost among people who call themselves liberal. She lost among people who call themselves moderate, which you would think would be a group that she would do well with against a Democratic socialist. She said herself last night that she's got work to do with young voters. She lost among them by a landslide, more than 60 points. And her campaign has really struggled to come up with a message that resonates with these young voters, a message that is anywhere near as compelling as what Bernie Sanders is selling to those young voters. They are inspired by him. They come out to his rallies and they feel like he is speaking to them, even though he is the oldest candidate on either side of this race. And Clinton and her campaign know that they need to try to figure out a way to connect with young voters, to remind them of the things that she did when she was young, but also to look forward, to give these young voters something to hang on to imagine what a Clinton presidency would be like for them.
Nancy, it's interesting. In her concession speech yesterday, Secretary Clinton did pretty much everything that she could to align herself with some of the values and some of the ideas and policies that Senator Sanders is putting forth. In a sense, part of her appeal to a lot of people has been her perseverance and her strength. In other words, looking to South Carolina. How will the dynamics change there, where you have to be a Democrat if you're going to vote for a Democrat, whereas in New Hampshire, you can be an independent and vote for either?
Well, I think she basically gave Sanders a big bear hug in her concession speech. It was kind of a if you can't beat him, join him type of a speech where she said, look, I share Senator Sanders' belief in campaign finance reform. And don't forget that Citizens United, this landmark Supreme Court decision that sort of opened the floodgates of big money into politics, that was a case that was brought by an organization that was running a movie against me. It is Citizens United versus Hillary Clinton, and so no one is going to be a bigger fighter for campaign finance reform than Hillary Clinton, she argued. She has been saying, in fairness, since the beginning of her campaign, that this is one of the 4 planks of her campaign, is reforming the campaign finance laws. But in the very beginning of the campaign, she also made a strategic decision that she would not unilaterally disarm, that if her Republican opponents, and in the beginning she basically thought there were only going to be Republican opponents, if they were going to be raising big sums of money from financial firms, from Wall Street, then she was going to have to do the same thing, even if she wanted to reform the system once she got into office. Well, what she didn't anticipate was that she was going to be running against a Democrat who would say, you know what, even that's not good enough. I'm not going to take money from Wall Street, or I'm at least not going to go to Wall Street with hat in hand asking for that money. And I don't have a super PAC, and I don't want a super PAC, which was one of Bernie Sanders' biggest applause lines last night. So now she has to figure out how to raise money when every time she does a fundraiser anywhere within 50 miles of Manhattan, that becomes a rallying cry for Sanders supporters.
Yeah. Well, Vlad brought up the road ahead, and I want to ask Steve Chaggaris about the difference when it comes to campaigning in South Carolina. We had two small states where it seemed like a lot of that retail politics shaking hands. John Kasich did, I think, 106 events. You know, really reaching out and touching people made the difference. South Carolina, though, it's a little bit of a different landscape, right, Steve?
Yeah, you're not going to have the influence of independents, which is a big deal, especially for people like Sanders and Kasich on each side. But also the electorate on each side is a lot more pure, if you want to put it that way. So on the Republican side, a lot more conservative. Kasich really sold himself as a moderate in New Hampshire, but it was interesting because in his press release after he was named the #2 in New Hampshire, he called himself a positive conservative, pivoting toward the conservative message that he's going to have to sell in South Carolina if he wants to have some success there. And on the Democratic side, it actually is a little bit less pure, more moderate in South Carolina, but also more diverse. And this is something that Bernie Sanders is really going to have to work on. If you listen to Bernie Sanders' speech last night, he talked a lot about criminal justice reform, how the economy can work for African Americans and Hispanics and minorities. These are issues he's going to pivot to try to broaden his base. He's going to meet with Al Sharpton today in New York, another indication that he's working to broaden out from just young white voters that are supporting him now.
Steve, I mean, you raise an excellent point. Once you leave New Hampshire, the Democratic Party, by some estimates, is 44% non-white. So in the next two states, Nevada and South Carolina, they have much larger Latino and African-American populations, which means that is he going to struggle to appeal to his base that he's had in Vermont and New Hampshire, which are, let's face it, white voters?
Well, it's going to be an uphill battle for him, but you know, there's 10 days until Nevada has their caucuses for the Democrats, and 17 days until South Carolina votes for the Democrats. So he's got time to work on this. And you know, Clinton has to look at, she's got some pretty major underlying issues herself, maybe not among the demographics that are voting in some of these states, but if you look at these exit polls from last night, she has major issues major problems on the trust and honesty issue, on does she care about voters. Sanders beats her on both of those things. And also the message that Sanders has been putting out there about the economy and income inequality. These are things that he's just crushing her on in the first two states. And she's got to figure out how to get these things fixed. If it's not just about the demographics and the fact that she had been leading in South Carolina polls before Iowa and New Hampshire. Now we've graduated onto there are some serious questions about her as a candidate and the issues themselves and how they favor right now, at least among Democrats, they favor Sanders.
Major, I want to just go back to you real quickly before we let you guys go. I was pretty surprised to see this statistic that we're going to throw up on the screen here. Amongst New Hampshire Republican voters, 64% of those voters favor a temporary ban on Muslims, 32% oppose. Clearly, Donald Trump has tapped into something in this party.
Yes, he has. And when that proposal was first floated by Donald Trump, it was questioned not only as a matter of legal propriety, can you do this? Does it in any way, shape, or form conform with the Constitution? But it was also attacked as a political overreach. The legal aspects of this have yet to be worked out because Donald Trump has never actually described how this would work, what would be the legal mechanism to do this. He's just left it as a rhetorical answer to the sense that people have that things are seriously out of control and they feel anxious about their own safety. And that is one of the core insights and strengths of the Trump campaign. It does not involve itself in policy specifics. What it does involve itself with and what it uses against its opponents, not just Republicans, but any political opponent, is a broad rhetorical answer to something that it senses that people feel. And in this case, it's anxiety, nervousness about terrorism. And so Trump took this proposal, went way beyond anything that anyone else was even talking about, And it resonated. And then what Trump says is, forget about the specifics. I said something, and now everyone's talking about it. That's what I do. That's what I bring to this campaign. I take the conversation in a completely different direction. And I will tell you, when you talk to Trump supporters, that is one of the things they find most appealing. That Trump takes the conversation in this country in a direction not only that they support, but they've long been waiting for. They're not convinced that Donald Trump is going to do all the things he says he's going to do. Many of them realize and will acknowledge he can't do all the things he's describing. But they like the direction, and they like the strength behind the messaging in pursuit of that general direction. And that's what Donald Trump has tapped into, at least in this state, and we'll have to see if that continues to resonate in a place like South Carolina.
Major Garrett, Nancy Cordes, and Steve Chaggaris, who had to run. I want to thank you guys so much for being out there in the cold. You guys have been working all day, all week practically, and we really appreciate it, and our viewers do as well. Thanks so much.